Hi, my name's Andy Napleton. I'm a video content creator from London, and today we are in a cocktail bar and we're going to be looking at some audio techniques for video. So today I'm actually using the Sennheiser MKE400 as well as the portable lavalier set as well. So we're going to be looking at the differences between the two. Right now you're listening to the audio on the lavalier set, which I'm connected to, but for all of the video and all the audio techniques later with the cocktail making, we're going to be using the MKE400. So what we're actually going to be doing today is we are going to be watching an expert cocktail maker make some fantastic cocktails, and we're going to be capturing the sound using a variety of different techniques. The reason that we might do this is it really adds to your video, because most content creators will always use music, but sound design is just as important as what you're filming and also what you're listening to. So before we get cracking, I'm just going to show you a couple of bits that are in my camera bag, and this is the kind of stuff that I tend to take everywhere. So first off, I've got a Sony a7S III with a Peak Design wrist strap that I use for video. My absolute go-to lens, which is the 16-35 2.8 G Master. I've also got a Tamron 28-75 2.8. I have a Sony a7 III with a 70-200 f4 as well. And then all of my audio gear is as follows. So I have the Sennheiser MKE400 shotgun mic. I particularly love this mic because A, it's incredibly small and it fits really well on top of my camera. It doesn't protrude really far out. You've also got a low pass filter that's built in, which is great for scenarios where you might have a bit of background noise. So you might be able to hear now there's an air conditioning unit directly above my head. And with a low pass filter actually built into the microphone, it just means that it will cut out some of those low frequencies. You do also have independent gain control. So you can plus or minus 10 dB depending on your scenario. In order to power this, you literally just connect it into your camera, and as soon as you turn your camera on, the microphone will also switch on. There is a massive green light that is underneath, so just keep an eye on that. I mean, obviously keep an eye on the audio levels in there, but it's all powered through your camera, so it just makes it nice and easy. You do also have a headphone output as well, so you can monitor your levels directly through the microphone. You don't have to necessarily do that. You can do it through your camera, but that's kind of up to you. And then finally, it just has headphone volume on the side, so you can just adjust how you're listening to it. Personally, I like to have it a little bit lower just so that you're not going to end up blowing your ears out, because sometimes it might still be very loud. Now onto my lavalier setup. So I am using the Sennheiser lavalier set. So you have a transmitter and a receiver. Again, really strong connection between these two. So it just means that because they're using a radio frequency, it means that the camera operator can move quite a lot further away. They don't have to be sticking right next to me like you would with a normal shotgun mic. It's also completely charged by USB-C, so just make sure that everything is charged. And the only thing I will say, just a word to the wise, just make sure that these things are switched on, because sometimes it has happened where you've been rolling, you have a great take and you're like, yeah, that's a wrap, you listen back to it and there's no sound. So just double check. It's just one button at the back, and then you should be good to go. So it sounds ridiculous, but make sure they're always turned on, otherwise you could end up in trouble. So now I'm just using a pair of relatively inexpensive headphones. The reason being is I just want to absolutely double check that I'm capturing the right sound, because again, there's nothing worse than when you get into post later and you realize the sound you actually wanted to capture is incredibly quiet and you've got an awful lot of ambience, and it just takes a lot more work to actually get the sound that you need. Audio check on here. And I'm actually using the inbuilt preamplifier, which is in the camera. So these are just on your audio settings, and it's the same for every camera. So you want to turn that up so that it's relatively high. But again, just be careful of what you're doing, because the last thing you want to do is have your levels far too high and you get all this background hiss and you get an awful lot of noise, and it can really ruin your shot. So let's just make sure that all of those are correct. And again, with this, I'm having the low pass filter turned on. Reason being is it does just drown out a little bit of sound from the side here, from the air conditioning unit. If I turn that back on, I can hear that awful lot more. So yeah, I'm just gonna put that on, and then we'll be ready to go. Now, we are going to just do a couple of practice movements. So this is more so about the actual camera movement to make sure that it echoes what it is, the sound that you're capturing. So for example, if we've got a static object here, so we've got the glass that we're going to be using. There's no point in me doing loads of mad camera movements, otherwise it's just going to look a little bit jarring. So I'm going to try and follow Luis, our bartender here. I'm going to try and follow him as much as I can to make sure that his movements are matched with what I'm doing. But again, because we are prioritizing the sound here, less so the visuals, I'm just going to make sure that I get in nice and close, just to make sure that that we get exactly what we need. And
oh, you went to big glass, yes?
Yeah, or however you normally do it, what looks best. Yeah. So do you normally go,
okay.
It's easier to actually shoot a lot of these things at a slightly higher aperture to make sure that you actually capture your subject. Because if I was to shoot this at 2.8, it would be very narrow and it would be very difficult for me to actually get everything right. So if we go from that, so, yep. And into glass. So now that I've practiced the movement, I know what he's going to do. The idea being is that I can really get in here and I can come up with him to the glass. So it should follow in one succinct movement. So let's go again. So it's always really important that you are actually talking to whoever you're working with, just to make sure that you know what's coming and they know what they're doing, so they're not caught off guard. So Luis was just saying that you're adding the sugar first, is that right? Okay, so what's the movement for that you normally do?
The orange as well. The last ones, the orange, so...
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you? So yeah, if we can do that like nice and close. So right, we'll go in 3, 2, 1. We captured about 4 or 5 different sounds there, and even the most minor sounds can make a huge difference to a video. So for example, as he was crushing here, that thump was really good, but then as he removed that tool from the cup, you could hear it just touching the edges of the glass. So all of those little details really, really matter. And the advantage with doing a stage shoot like this is it means that we can slow down, we can stop and make sure we got the sounds right, we got everything that we needed before we move on to the next stage. Because otherwise, Luis is very adept at being able to create these drinks very quickly. It's going to be painstaking for you. But for us, it's absolutely crucial that we get every single stage of the process, just to make sure that we get everything we need. In terms of also just framing, so framing the actual shot itself, we have this beautiful backdrop, but also we like seeing what Luis is doing with his hands. So it's not just about each of the individual bits. I'm not going in with a macro shot to get like each individual piece of sugar. It's the tools, it's his hands, it's the craftsmanship of actually making a cocktail, because believe it or not, it's not very easy to make a good cocktail. So what's next? That was a really good sequence, and the reason I didn't interrupt when anything was happening is because, again, we're focusing on the sound. And because I was so close to everything, I could really hear the pop of that cork, which is great. There's not a more satisfying sound, I swear to God. But you could also really hear when the shot was being poured into the shot measurer, and then from there into here, and obviously the ice as well. So making sure that every single stage of this, we just capture those unique sounds. And just as a bit of a sidebar to all of this, I do also always prefer to capture my own sound and not rely on anything online, because sometimes you might think, oh, ice is ice. It's sounding exactly how it's going to sound no matter the scenario. But I know, watching this, that the sound, when he used the trowel to then pour it into the glass, that's exactly the sound that I needed. It can sometimes be very, very difficult to match your existing footage to a sound library, because it might be filmed under a completely different circumstance. So that's just something to bear in mind. If you're looking at this and going, it looks like a lot of effort, I can guarantee it's worth it. So because this stage we're going to be stirring, I'm actually going to have a look and just see how it looks from the top, because he's got quite a long stirrer. So instead of it just cutting off at the bottom here and watching him stir from here, I'm going to just go over the top, and then I'm just going to rotate the camera, and also the mic will get right inside the cup so you can really listen to what's going on. That worked really well, and what was good is because I had a little bit of time during that to just do a couple of different movements rather than try and execute one move and then you realize halfway through, oh no, actually that's not going to work, making him start the whole drink again. Because it was quite a long process, it just meant that I could kind of come in. So at one point I was slightly like this at an angle to the glass, but then at the end I was right over the top of it. So it just meant that I was in a position that later in editing, because this is going to be all very, very quick, it's going to be really snappy. So we don't want to labor the point too much. It will literally be ice goes in, plunge at the stirrer comes in, and then just start stirring. So this will be maybe a second and a half maximum, but we absolutely got it. So that was awesome. So next stage. Perfect, that's great. So now when you just drop it into
Sorry.
That's cool. So I'm actually gonna ask you to do that again, if you would, just to taste it. 3, 2, 1, action. Are there any other bits that you might do to it now, or is that ready to be served?
Done.
That's ready to be served. So the only thing that I'll ask you to do now, if you do the stir again, and then as soon as you're done with the stir, literally just grab it with this hand and just place it here for me, like it's ready to be served. So now that's the old fashioned completed. And so the reason that I ended the shot with the camera being pulled back, and I was also zooming in, so it just means I create a little bit of a parallax effect. Not only does it keep it dynamic, but you've got to remember that we are still telling a story here. So it means that the journey that we've just taken is from basically ordering the drink. Luis has then made the drink and it's been served to the customer. So if you're using this for advert purposes, that's what you always want to kind of imply with these kinds of things. So another thing that's important to mention is we did start with an old fashioned because it is an easy one for us to be able to slow down if we need to, because you have also got to just make sure that you are doing your research into the drinks that you're going to be asking for, because some of these cocktails, as we're going to find out soon, involve very fast movements, involve speed as kind of the key. So being able to replicate and redo those shots is going to become more and more challenging. The difference between why you might use something like the lapel mic that I'm using at the moment and shotgun is that if you were to be shooting an ad like this, you might have an interview section in the middle. So you might actually have someone talking in between while you're making the shots. So that's going to give you obviously a much clearer sound, but that is really what these mics are for. They are for just one person so that you can chat straight to camera, or you can just chat in general and you can capture that conversation. So yeah, now we're going to be making an espresso martini, and this is going to be quite different because the cocktail maker Luis is actually going to be using a shaker. So I've already tested it where we just got him to fill it with a couple of pieces of ice. And just shook it for me so that I can get the levels right, because that is the loudest sound that we are going to hear. We're going to do it again though, just so that you guys can see exactly what we did. But essentially, you just always want to be double checking what it is that you're filming. Because if you went from, say, I turned the gain up or something like that on my camera to capture the ice, and then we suddenly went into a shaker section and I didn't recheck my levels again, it could easily be blown out, and then you just end up with something that's really loud and it sounds like a car going past instead of ice being shaken. So yeah, we are now ready to rock and make this espresso martini. So yeah, let's give it a go. So if we start with the opening of the bottle, so that I can make sure that I get you, I'm just making sure that I'm manually focusing, because if you rely on autofocus and he moves it slightly out of frame, the focus will then jump to the back, and you want to be controlling where the focus is, not the camera. So that was brilliant. And the reason why I didn't actually stop Luis after any of those steps is because of the way that it was flowing. I just thought, actually, let's just try this all in one go, because sometimes you can get lucky and you can literally just find if the bartender is very much in his zone, it's actually really good to capture that, because sometimes you can interrupt what he's doing and actually ruin the process. So that was actually fantastic. And just listening to it, the amount of sounds that we managed to capture, there were probably about 12 or 13 different individual sounds. The only thing that you might have noticed as well is that I deliberately didn't follow the camera over the top to see him actually grabbing the ice out of the tray below. The reason being, again, the flow was very much on this section here. So all I was doing was just gently rocking the camera backwards and forwards. I didn't move the focus around too much. Even when he was shaking, I just switched the focus manually to the edge of the shaker. Again, I am shooting at quite a high aperture, so there will be quite a lot that's still in focus in the background, which is totally fine because it's such a nice background to focus on. So we've made the two cocktails. So we have the old fashioned and we have the espresso martini. But there are two main ingredients that are synonymous with cocktail making. So that is mint and egg. So in order to get those sounds, we are going to ask Luis for a cocktail which hopefully can incorporate both, because there are two sounds that we really, really want to get. What would you recommend, Luis, that has, does anything have mint and egg in it?
Mojito.
Mojito, there we go, perfect. Everybody loves a mojito. So I'm just going to quickly run you through some of my camera settings as well, because I haven't mentioned those already. So I'm using an A7S III and I'm shooting in S-Log3. This gives me the most amount of dynamic range, because as you can see behind the bar, there's so much color. The last thing that I would want is to lose any of that by using just a standard color profile. I will be shooting in that for the entire thing. Last shot of the day, as I mentioned before, we want to get an egg cracking because it's a really satisfying sound, and obviously it's used in some of the cocktails. So we're going to give that a try now. We only have a finite amount of eggs, so hopefully we nail this in the first take or two. So yeah, let's give it a try. This. Okay, so just manually focusing again for this, and we're rolling. So in 3, 2, 1, action. That's it. So that's a wrap on the day, I think. That's a wrap for shooting. So Luis, thank you so much. You've been a star. And yeah, we're just gonna look through the footage now and wrap up. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that gives you a little insight into my creative process when it comes to working with sound and using various different types of microphones. If I can give you 3 top tips from today, they are probably just to make sure that you always bring a pair of headphones. I cannot stress this enough, just how important this is. If you forget everything else from today, if that's the one thing that you take away, you're gonna smash all of your videos, purely because it just gives you that extra layer of protection so that you're not just relying on what your camera is telling you. You can actually have a physical listen as to what's going on in the room around you and making sure that you're capturing the shots that you need. Second is to obviously, if you can, invest in a high quality microphone. It doesn't really matter what microphone that you go for, but one thing that I would recommend is that it does have a low pass filter built in. If it does have a low pass filter, again, it just cuts out some of the ambient noise. So like I said from today, things like air conditioning units or fridges or anything that has an electronic hum, that's just going to dampen it a lot for you. So it's just going to give you a huge advantage. And thirdly is to always just make sure that you are rehearsing and researching some of your camera techniques, because if you've only got 20 minutes with a client and you aren't sure what it is that you're going to shoot before walking in, you're going to spend that first 15 minutes figuring out what it is that you're going to do. So if you literally just do a little bit of research, and then if you also know the camera movements that you're going to be doing, you can practice those at home, you can practice them beforehand in any situation. It's just going to give you the best possible chance at nailing your shoot first time and keeping your client happy, making sure that you get all the shots that you need and all that good stuff. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much to Wex for having me on for today. And if you are going to use any of these tips yourself and create your own videos, then please use the hashtag WexHowTo. Again, my name is Andy Napleton. You can find me on Instagram at a.napleton.film. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. So see you soon. Cheers.